This week's video, I'm going to show you how I turn this 13-inch Camphor Laurel plate from material that shouldn't have made it on the lathe. I'll show you all the faults and as to why it shouldn't have made it on the lathe, but I'm so happy with the end result because I want to start moving away from using porcelain. I've also got some new tools to show you, a Pro Mount by Woodcut Tools and my new drill, as well as the 10 horsepower dust extractor, 3-phase. It's a beast. So, Camphor Laurel, this plate, there's the pith, and on the other side there is no pith. So, Kez cut this on the angle, and I should have known better, but what I think happened is I've cut it from one side and not seeing the pith on the other side. It's very important to know what Camphor Laurel is, or the species we're turning. So this is the leaf profile of Camphor Laurel. They are a noxious weed here in Australia. And now I'm going to try and pronounce this right, allelopathic. They spread a toxin into the ground, killing off all the other species around them, which allows them to take over riverbeds and creek beds. But the grain is favoured by cabinet makers and woodworkers, and including ourselves, wood turners, and they are extremely fast growing, 30 metres within several decades. And a nice big burl there, which would be very pretty. So, back to it. There's my new drill, Black & Decker. I use a Stanley compass there to help centre up the 150mm faceplate. And now this drill is really cool. I got it off an old wood turner who has now passed away, so keeping pieces around in my workshop, as you'll see soon.
A little bit too quick.
Just in my mind, keeps their memory going, and every time I go to use it. I'm not too sure if the sparks out of the back of that drill would create any fires, but I'm just in love with this drill. And I have another one I'll show you in another video. And you'll soon see that I use the wrong screws. And as you all know, I always give my face plates and chucks a flick at the end, and I notice something straight away. Yep.
Righto.
Screws are too small. Kazar. So I swapped them over, thought 30mm deeper screws, but you could also use a wood screw for this as well.
Dad's drill.
Using my father-in-law's drill there, and you'll see later I use my brother's pencil, which I carry in my smock at all times. The reason why I give the faceplate and chucks a flick at the end is because it helps secure and bind that metal on. So when I spin in reverse, it doesn't send the bowl or platter off. And now for extra security, I'm going to use the cup center and the tailstock, just because I've got a little bit of a bad feeling about this platter. Now this is where the fun begins. 19mm bowl gouge there with the 55-degree bevel and the heel removed. And the reason why I removed the heel is it allows the tool to get in a tighter space, creates less friction between the bevel and the timber, and also reducing chatter. I'm shooting the shavings away from myself so I don't get hit. And our culprit, the pith. And as we all know, we should always remove the pith whenever we cut out or process our timber. But as I pointed out there, I thought the pith was going in the opposite direction, but it didn't. So I don't know about you, but have you ever turned a piece that felt like you put a whole tree trunk on the lathe only to turn it down to a toothpick? And that's what this piece is starting to feel like. I always shape the pieces up to a blank canvas so I can see the piece for what it is. So I'm just pressing in to the timber there and creating that blank canvas. Whenever I make this cut, I always have my right foot in front of my left, or left in front of my right. Now I lost a little bit of footage here, but I'm just marking up the base and then the top. The base measurement is 80%, which I do for plates, or 70% for plates. For platters, it's always around that 50% diameter, and the top mark, where I'll start cutting to now, on the side of the plate, is the thickness that I want the plate to be at the end. And I'm starting to realise that things aren't going to plan. So I do a little cut there, which goes in a little bit and then out, which is known as a Roman ogee. Just a pull cut. We're just getting this roughly shaped down. And I'm not getting past this pith. And honestly, when I was doing this, I didn't know how this was going to go. I felt like turning the cameras off and throwing this outside the shop. So I'm about to mark up the extent of that pith and just try and cut it out completely, which later you'll see yourself that I didn't end up doing that. And now obviously the proportions of this plate weren't exactly spot on, but as you'll see later, it will help with the theory that I have for gravy slippage. Now I always rough shape it down to a blank canvas, get the known dimensions of the sides, shape the foot up, and then do the recess. So I make sure the foot is the only piece sitting on the ground, and then I go and carve out that recess. Now I felt something really funny. I just turned the power off. I felt like I wasn't cutting fast enough, and sure enough, I had the belt left on the highest spindle for where I use it to rough out, which produces maximum torque to the spindle, that belt setting there. So I'm going to move it to the middle to produce more speed to the spindle, because the reason why I was there is you could see those bowls at the back there. I was roughing out a couple of days prior, and now we're getting some decent speed. So I'm just shaping up that foot there and creating a concave in the middle, but a slight dome here. The reason why I'm cutting back the opposite way with this cut is because it lays the fibres down, and wherever that bevel goes is the direction your cut will go, is what I was showing you just there. Now we're going to mark up for the recess, which I'll use my dividers. And I'm planning on making a video of all the measuring tools that I use. Vicmark chuck with Vicmark chuck jaws on there. And I just noticed a little spider just recently here in Queensland. I'm not too sure what's going on, but there's spiders everywhere. Measuring to the outside of those chuck jaws with them slightly open. And I'm using brother's pencil here. Dan, he's going to mark it off for us. 12mm gouge with a 30-degree bevel on that. I'm just cutting back, and I'm leaving that base slightly domed, which allows me to go a little bit deeper when I turn this around. And I learnt that off Glenn Lucas from one of his DVDs on platter turning. 1 inch skew there, and I'm going to point to the other side because I'm watching the other side, not the side that I'm cutting, and that allows me to get a nice depth that I know and I can see clearly. I have this theory where if you ever get a bit of gravy on your meat and you have what's called gravy slippage and your knife and fork get pushed out to the side, it doesn't kick the plate up off the table. So the wider the foot, the more stability you'll have. I just want to talk about this 3-phase 10 horsepower dust extractor that I bought off Facebook Marketplace for $250, the best $250 I've ever spent. And when I arrived to pick it up, I couldn't believe the size of it. I didn't know that it was this big, and when I turned it on for the first time, it was so loud I couldn't believe it. So then I knew I needed a cabinet to make it in. And I just wanted to say, everyone, thank you so much for helping me out in the community post that I put up. I'm going to keep it as the 2 sides, but I will build a cabinet for it that is more soundproof and to not annoy the neighbourhood. So I'm just blowing off all the previous grits sanding, dust, and now I'm marking up 3 lines, which I'll show you in a second, helps me center my brand. This is one of the newest tools, well, the new tool. Dust extractor's second-hand, obviously, and the drill was from the 1980s. The Woodcut Pro Mount, perfect for carving and things like that. So they recently sent this out to me and said, give it a try and let us know what you think. So thank you so much, Woodcut Tools. And I couldn't think of a better way of how to sign things and brand things off the lathe, so I get it all done in one hit. Now, not a lot of people believe in branding. Just taking the gas bottle out of there for safety reasons. But this is my brand. It's my initials, Kerry Corny. And some people like to brand, some people don't. I do a mixture of branding and then writing the date, as you'll see, as well as the species. If I don't brand, I write my name and my full name. When I'm using this very cheap, inexpensive pyrography pen, I'm standing like a welder. Have you ever seen a welder? When they do big welds, they position themselves so where I'll end here is where I start. So I stand to the left and then sign across to the right. So I'm not going to get unbalanced. Branding is a personal thing. Let me know what you do. Sign or brand. Now I'm using Dr. Woodshop's walnut oil again. And now when I wet sand and I do the first coat, I let it sit for at least 5 minutes. Just allow that oil to soak deep into the timber. And I had a really hot tip from someone watching the videos to say put some masking tape on the back of the wet and dry sandpaper to avoid burning. And it worked an absolute treat. So thank you for that. Just buffing the oil in there now. I'll show you a cool tool later on as well. So when you want to spin and reverse, if you're worried about your piece coming off the lathe, this will prevent it. And I just dropped a screw, of course. And I'm frantically looking for it because I'm a bit of a wild man when it comes to cleaning up the shed. And I don't want that going underneath a car tyre if I sweep it out to the outside. You'll see how I give this chuck a flick at the end. And in my previous video I show you how to get the chuck off if you ever get stuck. I always try and make sure it's nice and clean, good contact, and I push in from the front. And I always listen to make sure I don't crack the timber, so very important. But you'll see the chuck jaws are open there slightly. And the reason why is because you can fit your calipers down the back to your recess, and that gives you a much more accurate reading. Now I'm going to true this face up, 19mm bowl gouge, 55-degree bevel. And I'm going to true it right up to get that clean canvas again to see what I'm looking at. And you'll see in just a second as to why I always clean things up and true them off, because that pith is out to haunt us. And now I believe that was a little bit of rot on the other side. Now I've cracked it, and now I'm going to marking, as in I'm going to get rid of it right now. And I've just marked up the extent of it as to how far it went in. And back to the tree trunk to a toothpick analogy that I used. I'm really starting to feel that come true right now. And that cut then would have torn timber off the back, as you can see, but man, I want to get rid of it all. Now, I consider myself a headstock turner. I rarely ever have pieces between centres, and I'm interested to hear what kind of wood turning do you prefer to do. Are you between centres or a headstock turner? I want to stick to bowls and platters and become extremely efficient at turning those. And I've just put my details for my Instagram account on there if you want to see some more behind the scenes footage from day-to-day stuff. Now I'm keeping all the weight on the inside there because that avoids chatter and warping of the plate. And now you'll see the end of those calipers. I've taped them with masking tape to avoid scratching any finished surfaces, so I can confidently put them around the back of that finished plate knowing that I'm not going to scratch them. If you're interested, I'll put some affiliate links in the description below. I get a small kickback. I'm not too sure how much I actually get, but finding pieces is a little bit easier instead of searching for hours, because I know what that feels like. See it there, dividers fit between the chuck jaws. That was a little tip I picked up off Glenn Lucas. That cutting edge is supported by my pinky there, so when I'm pushing the gouge across, or when I start the cut, it prevents the gouge from skating back towards myself, so I'm just supporting the tool. When you come in towards the centre there, just go a little bit slower, because as the piece turns, it's a lot slower towards the centre than it is on the outside of your piece. And we're looking there. Now, just checking right across, right into the centre there, knowing that I have that little domed base in the centre. I'm going to do a little bit more to get it down nice and light and thin. Just taking my time with this last cut. And you'll see how I add a little bit of detail with the skew in just a second. And that collar that I was talking about earlier, to make sure your piece never comes flying off the lathe when it's in reverse. Just checking for vibration there, because I'm just adding a little bit of detail with the skew. You just see it hoovering up that dust there. I'm going to say it, but I'm really enjoying having this dust extractor in the shop now. So it tries to drop and then it just draws it back up. Now this is the collar that I was talking about. It fits around the chuck as well as the spindle. And this prevents it from spinning off when it's in reverse. I've had that done to me before. Bowls come off and the chuck came off with it. So this prevents that from happening. Even if you do bind it on with the metal, like I do that little flick, it just adds that little bit of insurance. And for this platter, that's what I needed. A little bit of hand sanding there with the grain. With the walnut oil, I apply it the first coat now, wet sand it in, and then allow that to rest for a day, and the little fibres tend to raise up. I come back the next day and then knock those fibres down with a little bit of steel wool, and then reapply a coat. And then for the last coat, just apply a coat of oil over the top, and that makes a watertight seal. And now buffing the oil in. Little clean rag there. If you just saw, I turned my mask on. And I'm not just saying this, but I was blown away with this piece, and I started breathing in hot air, and I forgot that I had the helmet on without the fan running. And now for the moment of truth. I wanted to go inside and compare a porcelain plate just to see how well it measured up, and
Oh, how good is that? It's just perfectly.
I did not plan for this at all, but I was so stoked when it finally just matched after removing all that material. Now this will be my new dinner plate. The video on the left is of a bowl of Australian hardwood, red stringy bark. Thank you all so much for watching. I will talk to you all directly. Cheers.